Hello, welcome everyone to today's webinar. We can see you're coming in. If you would like to, you may use the chat function to let us know which country, state, or city you're joining from. We are delighted to welcome you to our webinar titled Navigating the Differences and Intersections of Community, Legal, and Court Interpreting. My name is Analia, and I am the manager of training and curriculum here at Cross Cultural Communication, the leading U.S. training agency for medical and community interpreting, and the creator of Blue Horizon, our online learning platform for self-paced and live training programs. I will be your host for today's one-hour webinar. My colleague, Naisel Zavala, Administrative Support Assistant at Cross Cultural Communications, will also join us today. Naisel will manage the chat and provide useful information throughout the webinar. Before we begin, and as we wait everyone to come in online, I would like to share with you our upcoming fall training program. Naisel will share the link to register. Please remember that CCC operates in the Eastern Time Zone. Okay, we have TCII TOT. The TOT trains and licenses interpreters to deliver the Community Interpreter International Program. This allows you to run your own training. How fun that would be, right? With the help, of course, of CCC. The fall cohort starts on November 3rd through the 21st. There will be 2 instructors, Otisha Ayala and myself. Next, we have Interpreting in Education. This brand new dynamic workshop is designed for interpreters who wish to work in K-12 public school, providing them with an understanding of ethics, effective communication management strategies, and specialized terminology necessary for success. The workshop will be presented by Mireya Perez, the host of the podcast Brand the Interpreter. The dates are November 11th and 13th from 6 to 8 p.m. Lastly, are you curious about educational interpreting? Try our free 30-minute primer, The Educational Interpreter Online. And get a taste of what makes this program essential for school-based interpreters. Explore the role, the laws, and why language access matters. And no commitment required. Now I will go over a few points regarding the webinar. The webinar presentation will last between 40 to 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A, which will take 15 to 20 minutes. Please remember during the webinar to keep the Q&A feature open and use the Q&A to submit your questions for our presenter. For other comments or questions for us at Cross Cultural Communications, please use the chat function instead. And if you want everyone to see your comments in the chat, please make sure your chat is set to everyone. Lastly, if you want to stay after our presenter leaves at the end of the hour to chat with either Naisel and me, we will be happy to answer any questions that you may have about both cross-cultural communications and Blue Horizon. This webinar has been approved for CE use, with the exception this time of NBCMI and IMIA. Please remember that between 24 to 48 hours after the webinar, attendees will receive the link to download a certificate of attendance. It will go to the email that you used to register for today's webinar. Please, if you don't see it right away, check your spam or junk folder Certificates are only available for attendees of the live session of this webinar. They must be downloaded, and please hear me out, this is important, within 3 weeks from today's session. Do it right away, please don't delay. We won't be able to say, and please, I'm sorry, yes, we won't be able to send it to you after 3 weeks. Also remember to download the certificate and save it in your computer, and you will want to add your name in the fillable field. Of course, you can always print it out. Okay, now to the best part of, enough of announcements and everything else, right? Without further ado, let's begin our webinar title, Navigating the Differences and Intersections of Community, Legal, and Court Interpreting. Our presenter today is my friend Carola. Come in, Carola. Let me tell you about Carola. She's a multilingual freelance translator and interpreter with over 15 years of experience working with government and industry at executive and operational levels. She holds 2 university degrees in translation studies and a master's degree in conference interpreting. She is a federally certified court interpreter and a master licensed court interpreter in Georgia. Carola works as a conference interpreter for various local and international clients and is one of the voices of a major news network. Moreover, she is a licensed trainer of the Community Interpreter International and dedicates many hours to volunteer as chair of the AAITE Ethics and Standards Committee, as advisory member to the Georgia Commission of Court Interpreters, and as a president of AAIT, the Georgia chapter of ATA. Carola, we are delighted to have you, and the floor is yours.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you, Analia, for the introduction. This is not my first webinar for CCC, and so thank you for inviting me back. I guess the other ones, everybody had a blast, or at least took something away from them, and that's why I am back. So hopefully you will all take something away from today's session as well. I've been following the chat and seeing where everybody is coming you. Hello to my fellow Atlanta residents. I'm located south of Atlanta as well. And hello, mis compatriotas argentinos. I saw somebody signing up from Argentina over there. I also saw hellos from Peru and the Dominican Republic and Jerusalem and Canada and Texas, the Carolinas, California, Massachusetts. So it is a pleasure for me to be here with all of you. I will try to keep an eye on the chat. Please remember to put your questions in the Q&A. I will try to answer as many of them as possible. And if any of you would like to connect with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. And happy to share additional information over social media with all of you. So this is today's topic. We're going to dive into the differences and intersections of community legal and court interpreting. And we'll see how deep we can dive today, because I want to set a baseline first. And once we've set the baseline, then we can see if we can maybe dive a little bit deeper into some of the questions that you may have later on throughout the Q&A. This is me, and Elia already introduced me, so there's no need for me to repeat this. I think the most important thing for you to know is that I am a certified court interpreter. I work mostly with the federal courts. I have experience with the state courts as well. In the early days of my career here in the US, I worked a lot in community settings and medical interpreting, and that is where my knowledge to discuss this topic comes from. And I'm also one of the trainers of the orientation workshop that court interpreters, or aspiring court interpreters, I should say, have to take here in Georgia in order to be able to then continue with the certification process. So kind of a little bit of I have information and glimpse, and can you give you a glimpse a little bit into everything. So if we have time at the end and you have any specific questions about court certification, I'd be happy to try to answer as many of those as possible. Let's start with a brief poll. I'm going to launch the first one now. And I want to hear from you what field you work mostly in. So if you would say your work is approximately 70% medical or 80% medical and only a little bit in court, then choose medical. If you work mainly in education, then just write that in there. I want to know what field you work mostly in. And about half of you have already replied to the poll. I'm going to look at the chat to see if there's anything in here. Yeah, don't answer in the chat right now, because right now I would like to see that in the poll so that I can share the results with you, so all of you can see. I have about 60% of you have responded, and so far over half of you work mainly in the medical setting, and only some of you in the court setting. The court does not include government. No, it does not include government, because today we're mainly going to discuss court, community, and legal interpreting, and that is why I have not included that. So if your work kind of is divided between education and medical, just choose the one that you feel you work mostly in. It's just to get an overall idea. I want to see how many legal interpreters I have here with me and how many come more from the community sector. So I'm going to end the poll now, because most of you have already replied, and I see a lot of you are answering in the chat as well. Not sure if the poll function isn't working for you, or you can't really find where to click. It doesn't matter. It is not an issue. So we're going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. And as you can see, over half of you work mainly in the medical field, and then the others are a little bit divided, kind of equally between community, education, court, and all of the above. Good, wonderful. So given that we have done that, I have a second poll for you. And if you don't know exactly what legal interpreting entails, don't worry. Just answer yes or no based on what you think the answer is. It doesn't really matter. Hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you will have a clear understanding of what legal interpreting is, the do's and don'ts, and what you need to take into account. Mostly work in court and private, lots of immigration. Yes, immigration is a different beast. We're not going to touch upon immigration today, because there are other factors that we need to take into consideration whenever we work in immigration court. So let's give it 10 more seconds before I end the poll. Have you ever performed legal interpreting? Yes or no? And so far, 2/3 of you are saying yes, and 1/3 is saying no. And I'm not taking into account the people responding in the chat right now. I'm looking at the poll. So ending the poll now and sharing the results. So you can see real quick the results. 63% of you said yes, and 37% of you said no. I should have included this question again at the end to see if anybody of you changed their minds, but we're going to leave it as is for the moment. So this is what we will discuss a little bit today. We will go into the definitions. We're going to compare legal interpreting to court interpreting, and then legal interpreting to community interpreting. We're going to discuss some commonalities, some differences, and we will dive into a Q&A at the end. And I'm just going to be glimpsing at my clock to make sure that I keep on track. Here we have two definitions. Court interpreting, interpreting on the record within a court of law or other official legal proceeding. And then we have legal interpreting as interpreting related to legal processes, proceedings, and others. And as we can see here, the main difference is very clear right here. And that is that when we perform court interpreting, it is on the record. Everything that is said in a court proceeding is transcribed by either a stenographer or a court reporter, and that is the main difference between maybe not the main difference, but probably the most important difference between court interpreting and legal interpreting. So legal interpreting basically refers to any type of encounter that may have legal consequences. So this could be client-attorney communications, this could be interviews with law enforcement, and anything that you can think of that could be present at an encounter and that could have legal consequences. And when I talk about legal consequences, I'm not only talking about legal consequences for the parties, but also legal consequences for the interpreter if the interpreter does not abide by the expectations and if the interpreter does not perform their jobs adequately. Let's move on to the commonalities between legal interpreting and court interpreting. So we're only comparing legal and court at the moment. I would like to hear from you in the chat what do you think that court and legal interpreting have in common? Any ideas? And just put it in the chat and I'm monitoring your answers. Terminology. Okay, yes, definitely terminology. Legal lingo, absolutely. Impartiality, yes, that is correct too. Ethics, terminology, confidentiality requirements, code of ethics, terms, accuracy, render the message faithfully, simultaneous mostly. No, that is not accurate, and we will dive into that a little bit deeper. Accuracy, we're officers of the courts. Yes, as court interpreters, we are officers of the courts. No advocacy in capital letters. Love that. Yes, thank you. Absolutely no advocacy. Legal terminology and ethics, zero advocacy. Yes, code of conduct and responsibility, no brokering. When we say no brokering, we're referring to no cultural mediation. And that is exactly what we do in court and legal interpreting. Confidentiality, special training. I see that. Legalese. Yes. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah. So here we go. Commonalities. Yeah. Court interpreters and legal interpreters fill the same functions, but in different settings. So that is very important. A legal interpreter does not necessarily work in the same settings as a court interpreter. Yeah. So obviously, both court and legal interpreters have to provide complete, accurate, and unbiased interpreting. There is no way around that. That is kind of the maxim that we always go by. Yeah. Then we follow a code of ethics and also conform with the standards of practice and professional conduct. And I would have to say that that also applies for any field of interpreting, not just for court and legal. And we have to have a good knowledge of English and of another language. That also applies to any field of interpreting. But I want to highlight that because oftentimes we think that just being bilingual is enough. And being bilingual is not enough, definitely not enough, and especially not in the legal field, where on top of the legal language and the other language, we also have to have an extremely good knowledge of legal terminology and the legal system overall, especially in countries where the legal system is completely different. Yeah. As court and legal interpreters, we enable equal access to justice. That is, we pave the way for a person to be able to access the judiciary, the legal system, in order to defend their rights there. And of course, legal and court interpreters must be capable of performing in all three major types of interpreting. That is sight translation, consecutive, and simultaneous. There's no way around that. Now that we've covered the commonalities, let's think about the differences. Differences that you can think of. Please share them with me in the chat. I know that I'm doing a lot of the talking, but I do want to make this as interactive and interesting as possible. Court interpreting is simultaneous, mostly simultaneous. I would not say it is simultaneous because we do perform sight translation and consecutive as well. The extent of advocacy. Well, there is really no advocacy in legal interpreting overall. That is my position, at least on this. Court interpreters need to be certified, should be certified, yes. However, there is a shortage of certified court interpreters and therefore sometimes qualified interpreters are interpreting Yes, we do use simultaneous interpreting in court interpreting. It depends on where we are interpreting and who we are interpreting for. Certification is absolutely one of the differences. Yes, simultaneous versus consecutive. Court interpreting, you're before the judge. In most of the cases, in most cases where court interpreters are performed, we are in front of the judge. Yeah. More flexibility to ask for clarification, liability. Well, if there's no certification in your language, then there are other ways in which you can get credentialed. And that starts with an oral proficiency interview, and we can go into that a little bit later on. Okay. Yes, you are qualified. You can be qualified. Yeah. Legal interpreting is not necessarily on the record. That is right. So here we start. Here we go. Court interpreting. Court interpreting was developed specifically to address the needs for impartial interpreters in on-the-record court proceedings. Yeah. So that means that for the courts, for judges to be able to communicate with non-English speakers or with limited English speakers, they needed to have somebody who was there impartially, who could provide an accurate and complete interpretation, and everything that the interpreter interprets is recorded on the record. It is transcribed as it is interpreted. And that is why accuracy is so important. And completeness as well. It is not the same if somebody states, I was there last Wednesday, than if somebody says, actually, let me think. I don't remember if I was there on Wednesday. Maybe it was Tuesday. No, actually, it was Wednesday. So all of that needs to be interpreted. And that is why we say it is accurate and complete, and it has to be interpreted as is. Second, court interpreting is adversarial in most of the times. What does this mean? It means that there are two parties who want something different out of that hearing. Yeah, if we're in a criminal case, the prosecutor wants the defendant to be convicted, and the defense attorney is trying to defend their client so that the client can walk out free. So that means adversarial. Two parties wanting two different things. And it is highly structured and highly rigid because there's so many rules that need to be followed, not only by the attorneys, but by every other officer of the court. We follow very strict protocols, procedures, and ethics and court rules. And when we are hired as a court interpreter, we are an officer of the court. We are hired most of the time by the court, especially when it in criminal proceedings. And that means that we do not work for either of the parties. We work for the court, which is one of the things that why it is considered that we are unbiased and impartial and neutral is because we are an officer of the court. We as court interpreters, our role is to help in the administration of justice. We ensure that the record is accurate. That means we ensure that whatever is transcribed on that record is an accurate and complete representation of the statement the limited English speaker made. And we are unbiased in our interpreting. And as court interpreters, we should be specifically trained, and we should be certified either through national testing, as is the federal certification for Spanish interpreters, or by the state court system, which is mainly the National Center for State Courts. Some states have developed their own certification exams, like California and New York, but most of the states adhere to what has been established and developed by the National Center for State Courts to certify their interpreters. Now, when we look at legal interpreting, we can think of legal interpreting of a field that evolved from court interpreting. It is less formally established. Yeah, it means there are fewer rules. And then legal interpreting also borrows from community interpreting. Legal interpreters work in settings that are less formal. It is usually not the courtroom, and these settings are usually collaborative. What do I mean by collaborative? These are settings in which the two parties that are meeting and need to communicate through the interpreter want the same goal. So for example, if we as legal interpreters are interpreting for an attorney-client interview, both the client and the attorney have as their goal to get the lowest possible sentence or the best possible outcome for the case. So in that case, we are supporting the attorney in communicating with their client. Other examples, for example, could be a mediation. A mediation is sometimes also adversarial because we have two parties who want something different, but there is the goodwill of them meeting together outside of the court system, that is outside of a judge with a mediator, a third party, neutral party, in order to solve their issue in a collaborative manner. Legal interpreters also have to follow a code of ethics, but on top of that, they have to abide by the code of ethics that governs the attorney's profession and the attorney's exercise of the activity. If we think strictly about legal interpreting as supporting an attorney, then we have to think of it as also assisting the attorney in identifying and fulfilling the client's goals. But we will see that legal interpreting goes way beyond just interpreting for attorneys and their clients. And finally, legal interpreters do not always hold state or national certification. It is not required to hold a certification to perform legal interpreting assignments. However, I would highly encourage you that if you want to interpret in legal settings, I would highly encourage you to get certified because it is extremely important to be able to have credentials in this area. I also want to mention that court interpreting in the US was shaped to a large extent by statutes internal to the US courts, right? And some areas of court interpreting actually evolved in response to client needs. Some say that there are fewer resources available for legal interpreters, but I do believe that if you want to interpret in legal settings, you have to be very much aware of the legal settings and legalese overall. So just to summarize real quickly, the differences, again, courtroom versus non-courtroom interpreting, that is, we could say court interpreting versus legal interpreting. Courtroom is adversarial, that is two parties that are opposing and want different goals, different outcomes. In the courtroom, we have a court interpreter. We follow the rules of the court and everything is recorded, everything is transcribed. And non-courtroom interpreting, where we have mainly legal interpreters being active in there, is a mostly collaborative setting. That is where both parties want the same thing. That does not mean that there is not disagreement, and that does not mean that sometimes there is some kind of a more adversarial nature to that. The legal interpreter acts a lot of times as an agent of the attorney. They also have to follow the attorney's code of ethics or professional conduct on top of their own professional conduct. And we are sometimes there helping them to build a case. So when we talk about legal interpreting, is legal interpreting part of community interpreting? Yes or no? I see a lot of yeses there. Some no's, mainly yes, sometimes. Still predominantly yes, some say depends. No, it doesn't really depend. It does not depend, and I'm going to explain to you why, and it's not sometimes. Legal interpreting is not part of community interpreting. Legal interpreting is kind of the umbrella term under which court interpreting falls, but legal interpreting is not part of community interpreting. These are two very different fields with two very different goals. So the main difference is that the goal of legal interpreting is for the interpreter to support equal access to justice. Yeah. And the main goal for community interpreters is interpreters support equal access to community services. And this is very important because legal interpreting encounters have legal consequences. Yeah? So community interpreting usually does not, I'm saying usually, I'm not saying always, usually does not carry legal consequences. But legal interpreting does have legal consequences. And Nala, I'm going to get to your question in just a second because you're asking how come, how can it be that legal interpreting is not part of community interpreting because it can be in schools and hospitals? I'm going to answer that question in a second. So, one more poll for you. And I'm going to launch it now. And in this poll, there are 3 questions. So the first question is, can a legal interpreting encounter take place in a hospital? Answer is yes or no. The second is, can legal interpreting take place in a school? Yes or no. And the third question is, can a legal interpreting encounter take place at a shelter? Yes or no. So I see that some of you are responding in the chat. If you would please respond in the poll, that would be extremely helpful for me. And I can see that about half of you have already responded. And the answers are yes, yes, yes. So 90% of you believe that legal interpreting encounter can take place in a hospital, can take place in a school, and can also take place in a shelter. And you are absolutely right. And I'm going to end the poll now. I'm briefly going to share the results so that you can see them. So you can see there's 90%, almost 90%, and 90%. And now we're going to dive into some examples. First example. What we call a sexual assault forensic exam. This is also known as a rape kit. These are usually conducted, the sexual assault forensic exams are usually conducted with a specially trained nurse. These exams take place in hospitals, in clinics, maybe even in the ER, depending on where that sexual assault forensic exam is available. So many people would think that this would fall under a medical assignment, but this actually is a legal encounter. Even if the victim decides not to press charges against the person who assaulted the victim, or if the rape kit is done as part of a larger investigation, there are legal consequences to this encounter, to this assignment. So if you're interpreting for a sexual assault forensic exam, you are interpreting for a legal interpreting encounter, which could have legal consequences, which also means that you need to abide by the code of ethics established for court interpreters or for legal interpreters, and not by the code of ethics for community interpreters. Next example. An independent medical examination. Independent medical examinations are usually part of workers' compensation cases. In these independent medical examinations, there is a doctor that was chosen by the insurance company to review the medical history of the person who suffered from an accident. They will examine them and they will probably order some tests to provide an objective assessment on the injury, any impairment, and any ability of work that you may have. In these cases, this independent medical examination is oftentimes the evaluation that will help resolve a dispute between the employee and the insurer and will determine whether treatment is necessary and what benefits will be granted to that worker within that workers' compensation case. And that is why an independent medical examination, even if it is performed at a clinic, a hospital, or a doctor's office, is a legal interpreting assignment. And in these cases, you have to abide again by the code of ethics established for court interpreters or legal interpreters. Expulsion hearings in a school. Yeah, this is also a formal proceeding in which a school district presents a case to remove a student for a serious violation of school policy. This is a legal proceeding. It is less formal than a court trial because the student also has the right to present their side of the story. But an expulsion hearing can also have legal consequences for that student. And that is why this is a legal interpreting assignment. This also means that you have to follow stricter rules than if you were interpreting for a community setting. Client attorney meetings are legal interpreting encounters because in this case, you are helping the attorney establish a relationship with their client so that they can prepare the defense for that client together. So attorney-client meetings are legal interpreting encounters. And these are extremely important that we abide by the complete and accurate interpretation and that we do not engage in cultural brokering or advocacy because we could be hindering the attorney in the performance of their duties. And we could actually be held liable, and the attorney could be held liable for our misbehaving if we do not comply with our code of ethics and the code of ethics for the attorney. And then witness preparation is an additional area, for example, in which legal interpreting plays a key role because we could be working, for example, with the prosecutor's office and helping them prepare a non-English speaking witness or a limited English speaking witness. And that also, in those cases, we also have to abide by the code of ethics of legal interpreting and court interpreting. So whenever we think about whether an assignment is a legal interpreting assignment or a community interpreting assignment, we do not have to think about where the assignment is taking place. The location doesn't matter. It is not important where the assignment takes place. It can be at a hospital, it can be at a school, it can be at an attorney's office, it can be at a clinic, yeah? It could even be in a cafe. What the important thing is that we have to remember is what are we interpreting? What is the content? Is whatever we are interpreting something that could have legal consequences? Then that is a legal interpreting encounter. The content of the assignment defines whether the assignment is of a legal nature or not. So what do you think the main problems are when community interpreters interpret in legal interpreting encounters? What do you think is the main problem when community interpreters interpret in legal interpreting encounters? Lack of terminology, they advocate, vocabulary settings, expertise, unprepared, lack of terminology, not aware of the protocols, cultural broker privacy advocating, they're not qualified, terminology, unprepared, code of ethics, certification, unaware of the boundaries and the code of ethics, absolutely. Lack of knowledge of the legal system, yes. Lack of expertise, knowledge, ethical, they're not certified. Well, we've mentioned before that legal interpreters do not necessarily need to be certified. It is better if they are certified, and there are more and more attorney firms, law firms, who are actually only hiring certified court interpreters for depositions, when in the past it was very common for other interpreters to be hired who were not certified. So community interpreters, and I'm saying here often because I don't want to imply that every person working as a community interpreter or any person working in legal interpreting is not aware of this. That's why I'm saying often, right? So oftentimes community interpreters lack the appropriate legal terminology. They may understand it in one of the languages, but they may lack the equivalent in the other, and they may not have sufficient knowledge of the legal system in order to be able to accurately convey the information. It is very important for an attorney, for example, to see if their client understands the legal terminology they're using or not. It is not up to the interpreter to simplify the message. Okay, So we have to be very much aware of that. Community interpreters are often unaware of the more stringent ethical principles. Legal interpreting is not a helping profession. A lot of interpreters tell me, oh, I'm a community interpreter because I love to help people. We all love to help each other. But the best way to help in a legal interpreting encounter is to stay out of it. And community interpreters often have a tendency to engage much more and to be much more present in that interpreting encounter. Legal interpreters have to be as invisible as possible, as to not interfere with the situation. Community interpreters often want to engage in cultural mediation and in advocacy. That is not our role. That is not our role. If we see that the trust relationship between the provider and the client is breaking down because of a misunderstanding, we might point it out, alert them that they may be a misunderstanding about that. But we are not there to provide cultural mediation and to provide advocacy, because we can be held liable for that. If we make a statement as the interpreter about the other person's culture that misleads the attorney into thinking something about that person that is not true, then we can be held liable for that. So we have to be very much aware of it. Very, very much aware. Also, community interpreters are often unaware that they are the attorney's agents, which means that we work for the attorney in a sense that the attorney is responsible for our behavior, for whatever we do. And oftentimes, community interpreters overstep their role and make themselves liable. Any comment community interpreters make in a legal interpreting assignment can be construed as providing legal advice. And that is unauthorized practice of law. And unauthorized practice by law is actually a reason why you can be sued. So we have to be very careful that whenever we are interpreting in legal interpreting encounters, we are not unconsciously, I'm not saying that we do this on purpose, I'm saying unconsciously providing legal advice or saying something that could be construed as legal advice and therefore be held liable because we're practicing law without being authorized to do so. And on top of that, there are a lot of interpreters, or a lot of attorneys, I should say, who do not like to be told what to do by an interpreter because they conceive it as us interfering with their job and not letting them do their job. Even though we were just trying to help. But the trying to help is overstepping our boundaries, overstepping our role, making ourselves liable, putting ourselves in a difficult situation. And again, we are there to help. And the best way for us to help when we are in a legal interpreting encounter, be it in court or outside of the court, is to stay out. That is the best way that we can help. So, recommendations, and we're slowly coming to an end. Obtain as much information as possible about the assignment before you accept it, to really determine whether you have the knowledge, whether you have the skills to work in that specific setting. Make sure that you study the code of ethics published by your local court system. If you work in Massachusetts, make sure that you inquire and that you are well informed about the code of ethics that is used by court interpreters in your district. You should also familiarize yourself with the model code that was published by the National Center for State Courts, or the NAJIT Code of Ethics of Professional Responsibility. NAJIT is the National Association for Judiciary Interpreters and Translators. They have also published a Code of Professional Responsibility, and you should also familiarize yourself with that one if you can't find a Code of Ethics for your local court, or if you just want to get a general idea of what it is. And then don't be afraid to withdraw from an assignment if you cannot handle it. And always keep the consequences of poor performance in mind. And consequences I am not talking about consequences not only for the parties of your interpreting encounter, that is the parties you're interpreting for, but also consequences for you. As I said before, in legal interpreting encounters, you can be held liable for not adequately interpreting and also for not adhering to the code of ethics or what the attorney is expecting of you. Nobody is going to look out for you in these encounters. You have to look out for yourself. And it is very easy to turn the interpreter into the scapegoat. It is very easy to blame things on the interpreter. So please be very much aware of this. And I know that everything that I'm saying may sound very, very harsh, but I'm really trying to make you aware of what all of this entails. Yeah, nobody is going to watch out for you. You have to be your own guardian angel in these situations. And then last but not least, I highly encourage you to get certified. Even if you don't want to work in the courts, there are a lot of other opportunities for certified court interpreters to work outside of the courtroom if they don't want to work inside the courtroom. A lot of certified court interpreters don't like to work at hearings in front of the judge with that pressure. And that is totally fine. You don't have to. There are huge opportunities for everybody out there. But if we want to be seen as the true professionals in the field that we are, the best thing that we can do is get certified. I hold a medical certification. I barely work in the medical setting anymore. But I still believe that it is key for me to keep up with that certification and to constantly be engaging and continuing education. So thank you all for being here and to continue to strive to improve in your skills. And hopefully at one stage we'll be able to stop saying that we are professional interpreters and we can just go and say we are interpreters, because I have never heard of an attorney introducing themselves as a professional attorney or a professional accountant. So for some reason, we still have to do that. And as I said before, always look out for yourselves. So with that, thank you all for being here and for participating and engaging with me in the chat. I see that there are a lot of questions in the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I know that this was just a general overview, and I'm sure that there's many more questions to dive into. Maybe we can address some of these in the Q&A.
Thank you, Carola. Very interesting. And I'm a believer. We need to instill the fear of God in people, right? If we are not sure, we better be extra careful. You know, Carola, you're like one of us here at CCC. You've worked for us. I just let you look at the Q&A and choose the questions that you think would be most important in general for everybody to know.
So first of all, I want to add something to what you just said, Analia, about not being afraid to decline an assignment. And I think that is key. And I'm going to tell you why. Because oftentimes, I know that if we're freelancers, it is really hard to say no to a job because it feels like we're taking that money they're offering us for an assignment and like throwing it away in the trash, right? But whenever we are on the edge of whether, should I not, I would say, first of all, go with your gut feeling. If you're hesitating, it's most likely because you should not take it. That's the first kind of sign. And second, I have often observed that whenever I have been kind of on the edge of wondering whether I should accept something or not, every time I have said no to something, I have been offered something better for that same time slot.
Wow.
So what I mean by that is we just have to have the right mindset. If we are doing the right thing, in one mysterious way or another, we are oftentimes rewarded. So don't be afraid of turning something down. It is sometimes better to turn down something and not have that difficult or that very awful situation of being in an assignment where we're feeling that we're not up to par and having to decline later through the mid of an assignment is actually worse than saying no from the get-go.
100%.
Yes. And we also have to take into consideration that whatever we do as interpreters reflects upon the entire profession. It reflects upon all of us. So nobody is going to remember whether Carola did a good job at that specific court hearing or at that deposition. They're just going to remember whether the interpreter was good or not. And if we want people to reach out to us and want to hire us, we want them to continue working with interpreters instead of turning to AI, then we have to show them that we are worth it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow, powerful. Okay, go for it. Choose what's your next question.
And we still have questions to answer in the Q&A, right? I should have saved that for last. Do depositions qualify as court or legal interpreting? Depositions qualify as court interpreting because depositions are recorded. There is a transcript that is done for that deposition, and that is why a deposition takes place on the record. It is a little bit less strict and less formal than a courtroom proceeding because there is no judge ruling on objections. And I would say that it is a little bit less strict because oftentimes attorneys use non-certified interpreters for depositions. But I also want to point out that because there is a transcript, we can be held liable for the interpreting. And that is going to be used as a piece of evidence if that case is not resolved out of court in a court hearing. So just pointing that out in case you were doing depositions and thinking that, oh, there's nothing wrong with it, and just be very much aware of that. So that is one of the questions. Okay, so let me see, what else do we have? Differences between legal cases and criminal cases. Every case is a legal case. And then within legal cases, we can have a civil case, we can have a criminal case, we can have a family law case, we can have a divorce case, and all of those fall under different rules of procedure. So family law governs divorce and child support and guardianship, for example, and criminal law is everything related to either felonies or misdemeanors, and then civil law applies to civil cases, which could be intellectual property right struggles, or I'm thinking any issues related to tenants or insurance. So there's a lot of different realms within the legal system that apply. So you need to be familiar with the different types also where you can where you feel comfortable with, because you may not feel comfortable working in family law. You may only want to do criminal, or maybe you don't feel comfortable with criminal and you just want to focus on civil law because there are different consequences and you're not necessarily sending somebody to jail. I mean, and it's definitely not you, the interpreter, but you still have to be able to live with having to interpret for something like that. I'm just going to the questions real here, trying to see.
And I want to remind everybody, please post your questions in the Q&A. Those go directly to Carola, just for reading. So please do that. Thank you.
I'm not going to see all of the questions in the chat. So, and you can all reach out to me later on if there are additional questions that I don't get to answer, because I don't think I'll be able to answer 33 questions in the Q&A that I see right there. Questions. Are interpreters allowed to interrupt the proceeding to ask for clarification? Yes. Actually, we are obligated to interrupt the proceedings to ask for clarification because we cannot interpret what we don't understand. So it is not up to us to just say, okay, I would like to clarify something. We have to ask for permission from the judge. So whenever we need to interrupt the proceedings, and I'm talking about a court proceeding here, I'm not talking about legal interpreting, I'm talking about court proceedings specifically. Obviously, in legal interpreting, we would have to ask the attorney that we are working for example, if we could ask for clarification. We always have to address the judge first, and the judge has to authorize the interpreter to actually ask for clarification. Sometimes the judge will ask the attorney if they're fine with the interpreter asking for clarification. Sometimes they will grant us. Sometimes they will ask us what the clarification is, if it is a slang word, if it is for a name, if it is for a location or something else, because all of that could have implications for the case. Maybe if it is a slang word, the attorneys would rather that we keep the word in the language that it was said, so that the attorney can keep following up and ask a question about that and continue with their line of questioning. Because that could be part of the strategy of the attorney. And we could actually be undermining the strategy of the attorney if we start clarifying too many things. Yeah. So there are a lot of considerations, and that is why we have to make so many micro decisions in every second in any interpreting encounter, not just legal or courts. But here we have that additional level of fine-tuning or fine skills, and that kind of that intuitive kind of thinking that we need to add to this, because there is also a full strategy behind what the attorney is doing in their work. So we don't want to interfere with that, or we don't want to interfere with the court proceedings overall. Let's see. Trying to... How come a legal interpreting encounter can take place in a cafe? Because an attorney might meet for the first time with a client in a cafe, for example. Probably not, but I'm just saying, okay, it could, in theory, happen. It probably was just a random example that I gave, and that I shouldn't have given because it probably gave rise to more questions than answers. But just think of, whenever we talk about legal interpreting encounter, don't think about where the encounter is taking place. Think about what is being discussed. Okay, and that is important. What is being discussed at that encounter? Yeah. Is it not against the code of ethics for community interpreters to be engaging in advocacy? So there are different takes on the advocacy issue in community interpreting. There is one line of thought that believes that community interpreters may engage in advocacy, and there is another line of thought that believes that community interpreters should not engage in advocacy. Advocacy is one of those topics that is very poorly understood by community interpreters overall, where a lot of training is still needed. And I can say that from my own experience, and I'm sure that Analia would have a ton of things to add to that. We're not going to dive into a discussion on advocacy now, because that would be a topic for a different presentation and would probably take us over an hour. What is really important for you to remember is that court and legal interpreters never engage in advocacy. We never engage in advocacy. First of all, that is not our role. Second, if we are in court, there is an attorney, and that's the attorney's role to advocate for their client, not us. And in a lot of other legal interpreting encounters, there are other people present who can advocate for the non-English speaker. It is never the interpreter's job in a legal interpreting encounter to advocate. This is very important. Again, for the same reasons that I mentioned before, it could have legal consequences for us. What if the judge asks for some cultural issue? The only expert on their own culture is the person themselves. So I may have grown up in the same country. I may speak the same language as the other person. We may have even been born close enough so that we are part of the same generation. But the way that I was raised, the school that I went to, the friends that I had, all of that are a very different culture from the person that I may be interpreting with. Even my siblings and I perceive culture differently because of how we are and of how we were raised, even though we have the same parents, we went to the same school. But there are differences between how I perceive culture and how they perceive culture, because we had different experiences with culture. So if a judge asks for some cultural issue, as the interpreter, I would always first suggest to the judge to inquire with the non-English speaker themselves, instead of us explaining it. We are not cultural experts. Overall, we are generally not cultural experts. We are not an expert in that specific culture of that specific person. So I personally would always refrain from explaining even cultural things, and would always encourage the parties to dive into the topic themselves and ask the questions that they want to have. It is always better if the other person explains it themselves and we interpret the explanation.
Carola, thank you. Before
Yes.
you go to the next question, I just want to let everybody know it's almost 12:30, once we hit the, bottom of the hour, 12:30, the webinar is formally over. So if you choose to dismiss yourself because you have to go back to work or do whatever you got to do, which is right now 12:30, you are still considered that you were present for an hour and you will receive the link for the certificate of completion. If Carola decides to stay a few more minutes, we will appreciate it. But I just wanted to say people can formally go if you need to go. And Carola, let me say this before I forget. I forgot on the last webinar. We do want to thank our ASL interpreters for the phenomenal job that they do and to be part of, just this amazing webinar. So anyway, people can be dismissed or you can stay for a few more minutes that Carola may kindly give us. But she also needs to go back to work. She came from work. She told me, Analia, I'm going to be there right before the webinar. So anyway, go ahead, Carola.
I just want to answer a couple more things that I believe are important. How do you get qualified as a court interpreter? First of all, you have to contact your court administration office in your state. Each state has their own proceeding about the requirements to get certified. Most of the states require that you take an orientation. That's usually 1 or 2 days. Then you have to pass a written exam, and then you have to pass the oral exam in order to then become certified or licensed. So my encouragement to anybody who is thinking about becoming certified, go to the website of your local court district and find out what the requirements are from them. I have another interesting question here about a pre-session in a court setting. My answer to that is it depends. Usually when I am hired as an interpreter of the court, if you work regularly in the same court, you know which judges and which attorneys are used to working with interpreters. There is a lot of training being done currently in teaching judges how to work with interpreters and attorneys as well. So that is becoming extremely helpful for us because it is much easier for them and for us to kind of know what the expectations are. My first question usually whenever I'm working with somebody I haven't worked with before is, have you ever worked with an interpreter before? If they say yes, then I say, wonderful, just 2 things. Please remember that everything that you say will be interpreted. And if I need you to pause, I will tell you. That's the first thing towards the attorney. Most of the attorneys I work with have worked with interpreters before, which makes it a lot easier. The second thing I do with the attorney is I am briefly going to introduce myself to your client. I'm going to tell your client my name. I'm going to tell your client that everything is kept confidential. Usually the attorneys say that to the client anyway, so we don't necessarily have to say that. But I also tell the client, if at some point you don't understand what I'm saying, please interrupt me and I will let your attorney know. Because I believe that that is very important. Sometimes they are afraid of interrupting us out of kindness or out of respect. And I do want them to interrupt me if there's something that they don't understand. Not so that I can answer the question, absolutely not, but that I can convey that question to the attorney and that the attorney can dive deeper into that question that the person had. Liability insurance for interpreters, absolutely. You should get an E&O insurance. That is what we call an errors and omission insurance. Absolutely necessary for anybody, any interpreter, not only those working in the legal field. Highly recommended. If you are staff somewhere, ask your employer if they offer it for you. Oftentimes, if you're working as a staff interpreter, that insurance or liability insurance is included in the in your benefits, or you are covered under the liability insurance of your employer. But if you are a freelancer, I do recommend that you get errors and omissions insurance. And I'm not going to recommend any insurer specifically. I don't. I can't promote anybody here, so you'll have to do your own research. I'm sure you'll find that if you type errors and emissions insurance in Google, I'm sure that Google will have plenty of answers for you. Why is simultaneous interpreting not required to be on the record? Okay, this is a very good question. The only thing that is transcribed on the record is everything that is said in English. because the courts function in English. Otherwise, you would need to have court reporters who are fluent in any of the languages spoken in the court system, and that would not work. When we do simultaneous interpreting in court, we are only interpreting for the defendant. And by doing that, we are supporting equal access to justice. And we are supporting the defendant in providing and supporting their own attorney in creating the best defense for themselves possible. And that is why we use the simultaneous interpreting, because in that case, we are not interpreting for the court, we are interpreting for the defendant. We use the consecutive mode whenever the non-English language is spoken in the courtroom, because everything that we interpret into English has to be taken down by the court reporter. And that interpretation into English is what is going to be part of the record. I don't know if that was clear enough or not, because there are a lot of nuances, but what else? I see a question from Anisha about in the Atlanta area and signed up for the workshop coming up. Send me a message through LinkedIn and I'll probably be your instructor for the upcoming workshop. So you'll meet me there again. Appropriate procedure to become a medically certified interpreter. Yes, you start by taking the 40-hour interpreter training course, and you can take the community interpreter with CCC, for example. And then you sign up you choose who you want to become certified by, either CCHI or IMIA. Do your research, because the certification exams are slightly different. And then you take that certification exam, first the written, then the oral. And after that, hopefully you'll be certified. And don't forget, you need to practice. Nobody passes the exam without practicing. Yeah. So,
Yep.
yeah. I would probably say interpreters are not born, interpreters are made.
I agree with you 100%.
We all need to work on our skills, and we all need to continuously work on our skills and our terminology. Not because we studied once and passed the test once means that we're done for the rest of our lives. How often does the court use remote video interpreting? It depends a lot. It depends a lot on the court. If they use video and remote interpreting. Not only depends on the court, it also depends on your languages. Languages of lesser diffusion have a higher chance of working remotely for the courts, because courts do not always want to pay for travel expenses. So you can most likely have a higher chance of having remote assignments. For languages like Spanish, I would say it is less and less likely, unless the court is in a very remote location, because there are more interpreters available. So that is something else. Don't you think interpreters still may be replaced by machines through AI sooner rather than later? Oh my God, I have to answer this one because this is like the hot topic of the season. At the current stage, my answer is no. Of course, I don't know what is going to happen in 10 years or maybe 5. I don't think that anybody was expecting ChatGPT to take over so many things so quickly. I think the first consideration that we have to do is how confidential is the encounter that or the setting that you're working in? Because AI interpreting is being used at interpreting encounters, probably more at the business kind of meetings or tourism kind of level. And those are very low stakes encounter where confidentiality is not necessarily an issue, and where if AI gets something wrong, it doesn't really matter because it's not going to change the outcome of the encounter. I believe that it will take a lot of time to define what would be a low stakes encounter in the medical or in the court or in the legal or the community setting overall, to determine first in which settings AI can be used, in which settings confidentiality would not be compromised, and in which settings, when I say low stakes, is a setting in which if machine interpreting is used, it
Mhm.
would mean could not have a potential negative outcome or negative effect on the outcome. So I don't believe that interpreters are going to be replaced in the short term, especially not in court or in medical, because of the confidentiality nature of these kind of settings.
Mhm.
Kind of looking further. Sometimes judges are mean and try to scare you. Well, if you're doing things right, then you shouldn't be scared by a judge. That is also part of being a professional, is that you know how to deal with those situations and you know how not to take it personal and to stand by your interpreting and to stand by your code of ethics. But I understand that that also comes with practice and that also
Uh-huh.
comes with growing confidence in yourself. So the more experience you have, the less scared you'll be of it, of judges. Okay, I'm not going to go deeper into community interpreting because that is not part of our, well, it is part of the conversation today, but I can't really go deeper into control, mediation, and advocacy because we would spend here all day.
Mhm.
Test anxiety, well, breathing, meditation, preparing. There are tons of strategies. And do you have a backup interpreter for court sessions? Okay, so I have to say that usually for court hearings that last less than an hour, we work by ourselves. For anything that is longer than an hour or
Mhm.
expected to last at least 2 hours, it is recommended that we work in a
Mhm.
team of two, especially for trials. This is not a standard that has been implemented, I would say, throughout all of the districts and in all of the courts. It is sometimes still hard to request two interpreters for trials, especially at the state court level. I would say in those cases, advocate for yourself. You have to be
Mhm.
able to advocate for working conditions, just as you
Mhm.
have to be able to state whenever you can't hear clearly or whenever the person is not speaking into the microphone or going too fast, because we cannot interpret what we don't hear. We cannot interpret what we don't understand. And that is why it is really important also for you to be able to
Yes.
stand up for yourself and not be scared by the judge, to ask the judge to speak into the microphone if they're not doing so. Okay. I
Carola,
think
you have been more than kind.
I've covered like the most
Yes.
important questions in here, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of others that I wasn't able to answer. So contact me personally if there's anything else that you would like to know that I haven't answered. I know that this was just a general overview and that we did not dive as much into detail as we would have wanted to. I'm not going to talk about rates because that varies very much from district to
Mhm.
district and by languages. So um, that's not a topic that we can discuss with a yes or no or very short answer. So hopefully everybody took something away from today's
Oh,
webinar.
I have, Carola, and I have heard you speak before. This was you elaborated, you get deeper into court and legal interpreting. Okay, everybody, round of applause for Carola, right? If you go to ATA, chase her. She's going to be at ATA. So now
Yes,
you know, look for Carola, get an autograph. Okay.
I will be there and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. I'm also presenting on Thursday. So if anybody is there, please come and say hi because I love to meet people in person if they've been at one of my presentations. It's always good. I can't see you because this is a webinar, but it's always nice to
Yes.
connect with people who've been at my
Abs-
presentations. So
Absolutely. And I'll see you next week, Carola. I'll be
yes,
there at ATA as well.
I will make sure
Thank
to
you
stop
so
by and say hi.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. We're going to let Carola go. I just want to say, on behalf of CCC, we thank Carola for coming in and just kindly sharing her knowledge, her expertise, all of her experiences. And again, we are just very, very grateful for that. I want to again remind everybody you will receive a link.
Bye, everyone.
Carola, a link to download your certificate of completion within 24 hours to 48. Don't panic. Let's get the 48 hours, okay? If you don't see it, check your spam folder, your junk folder. If you don't see it right away, CCC will be at ATA. So if you go to ATA, please say hi, come to the booth. We would love to meet you in person, see some faces. And again, thank you so much for joining us. This is amazing, right? Growing together. Like we say in Spanish, un pueblo unido jamás será vencido. Interpretation, a united people will never be overcome. Something like that. Okay, everybody, it's 12:45. Have a good rest of your day, of your week, till next month. Thank you, everybody. Bye.